Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. For the colleagues who are having the coffee outside of the meeting room, may I kindly invite you to continue to enjoy the coffee inside of our meeting room. And we will start our panel session very soon. Ladies and gentlemen, 女士们、先生们，大家下午好。Thank you very much for attending this parallel session hosted by the Independent Evaluation Office of the New Development Bank. It is my great privilege today to be the moderator for this session. Every person in every country is somehow impacted by the climate change. It is also for this reason in the international development community, both the bilateral partners and multilateral partners working together to support countries to accelerate their transition towards climate resilient economies. As a new multilateral development bank established 10 years ago, NDB works closely with partners to explore the solutions and share knowledge. It is in this context we really have the great privilege to invite distinguished panelists to attend our session and focus on the insights from evaluating climate resilient infrastructure. We have the distinguished guests sitting at the podium, which include Ms. Nidhi Cheever, Director General of Development Monitoring and Evaluation Office of the Government of India, Dr. Roman Novotivo, Chief of Environmental, Social and Governance Division of the New Development Bank, Mr. Andreas Roman, Head of Independent Evaluation Unit of the Green Climate Fund, and Mr. Gaochang Li, Assistant Director of Engineering Management Department of Guangdong Yuedian Yangjiang Offshore Wind Power Company. Our session today will have three segments, which including welcome remarks, followed by a dedicated panel discussion, and we will also open the floor to welcome any interactions from the audience to have a closer interaction with our panelists. With this very short and brief introduction to the session flow, I will now give the floor to Ms. Ashwani Muthu, Director General of the Independent Evaluation Office of the New Development Bank, for the welcome remarks. Mr. Muthu, you have the floor.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I would first of all like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Asian Development Bank and the Ministry of Finance of China, along with the Asia Pacific Finance and Development Institute, for organizing this year's Asian Evaluation Week. This year, as you know, it's a particularly special edition, being the 10th edition of the AEW. So, hearty congratulations to them all. NDB, Independent Evaluation Office in particular, is very delighted to support the Asian Evaluation Week and to participate actively in the discussions. We have actually participated in all the editions since our office was established in 2022. I would like to also thank all the speakers who have joined us today from different countries, different institutions, and I'm really delighted by their presence. Knowing them personally, I know it's going to be a very enriching and very exciting dialogue on a very important topic. Let me briefly introduce the Independent Evaluation Office of the New Development Bank. As I mentioned, while the bank was established in 2015, the Independent Evaluation Office was established in April 2022. I report directly and exclusively to the bank's board of directors. And our mandate is to independently evaluate bank policies, bank strategies, bank operations, processes, and instruments to strengthen accountability, governance, to learn lessons for greater impact. In the more than 3 years that we have been established, we have completed around 15 evaluations of different projects, programs, policies in different NDB member countries. And specifically with regard to China, currently we're conducting portfolio evaluation of NDB operations in China, as well as specific evaluation of an NDB project in the Guangdong province. These evaluations will be completed later this year. Now, coming to the topic of today's session, I think the topic is particularly relevant and timely. Climate resilient infrastructure, not only in light of the forthcoming discussions in Brazil, in Belém, at the COP30, but more importantly because, as the moderator mentioned, climate change is really impacting our lives across the spectrum, across the globe. With extreme weather patterns, it is fundamental that investments truly are climate resilient. There are a number of lessons that have emerged from our evaluations, and of course this is not the time to share all of them with you, but maybe to highlight a couple of them. One of the lessons that we have found in our evaluations of projects funded by the bank is the importance of promoting greater investments in research, development, and innovation so that infrastructure put in place is sustainable and economically viable. I also personally believe that while global infrastructure financing requirements are enormous and that there is space for multiple actors, we need greater coordination, greater co-financing, and greater cooperation across the MDBs, the IFIs, governments, and others to generate greater value for our member countries. But let me not continue because we really want to hear the views and reflections of the distinguished panelists here. And I'll stop here, thanking all of you for your participation, and I'll be happy also to contribute to the question and answer session that will take place after the distinguished panelists have shared their reflections and views. Thank you very much, and look forward to meeting you also bilaterally later on. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mutu, for your very encouraging opening remarks. And with that, now we will move to the panel discussion because I believe all the audience sitting in this room and share the same feeling with me to hear directly from the insights from our partners from different areas. I will start the first round of questions with Mr. Roman from New Development Bank. We know that established in 2015, NDB is the first multilateral development bank entirely established by developing countries and emerging markets, and we understand that the projects financed by NDB not only focus on the investment, but also will focus on the social and environment aspect. So Mr. Roman, as you are leading the environment and social governance function in NDB, could you share with us some examples or good practice that has been embedded in our projects financed by NDB in terms of how to better incorporate to ensure the project to achieve the sustainability in environment and social governance? Over to you, Mr. Roman.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first, let me start with thanking for invitation to be part of this panel, thanking to the organizer, thanking to the competent evaluation office of the NDB. I have very limited experience with evaluations, and I'm a practitioner. So in the previous session, we had very lively discussion about how all the practitioners hate evaluators. So I guess I'm here partly to dispel the myth to some extent. And another important aspect, before working in NDB, And we just heard how new NDD is and how we all can kind of find a way how to work. I worked at two other MDDs in the past with a very long history, maybe like 40, 50 years each. You can imagine which ones are those. And when I was a subject of evaluations there, it was kind of sense of, they evaluated your performance, how you perform compared to where you go, where you have to do. But in NDD, I think we all place in our evaluations not from the benchmarking purpose, but actually much more important functions for us. Which way we should develop, because the bank is very fluid. And the bank is still looking at its identity, its business model. So I think it's very important to have this evaluation mindset, not only for our evaluation office, but also for the bankers to go. And I think, again, thanks for bringing me here. I already learned quite a lot this morning from different presentations on everybody with my thoughts. Coming back to the question about environmental, social, and governance aspects. For the NDB, like for other development banks, is extremely important. We do assess all of our projects. We receive a proposal for investment and financing from the perspective how much of the negative impacts the project will have on environmental, social, and how much positive development benefits the project will bring. So I think the trade-off, which is very common to all development banks, is also very important for us to assess. And I see our integration of ESG agenda analysis of policy like several different pillars. Like one of the very important pillars in the equation, how do we select our project financing? From the number of the proposals we received, we selected only the projects that fit the profile of what we call sustainable infrastructure. So by default, in the very nature of the project, we have to have aspect of sustainability. It should be something that will help the communities to sustain in the future, and it should be something that, as a piece of infrastructure, it should remain sustainable in the future too. We are infrastructure bank. So a lot of questions, for example, that usually arises with in regards to the financing the programs, financing the policies, financing activities like that, doesn't really come across to us yet, because so far our portfolio is mostly real assets, real infrastructure assets, with a real positive impact and with very real negative impact on environmental social. So the process, selection of the project. The project should be sustainable, it should fit within the objective of the government, of the policy of the government, and it should help the communities to sustain in the future environmental and social situations. So second, very important, how do we mitigate environmental social risks? And here we're talking about the same things. We have environmental social policy framework very similar to other banks, and every project that we do has to undergo the very thorough review of environmental social risk assessment. So we have several particular aspects that we're looking at: assessing environmental risk of the environmental social impact assessment, resettlement, which is one of the main risks for infrastructure projects like our bank facing indigenous people, very important, gender, very important, community engagement. So for every project we have to undertake this kind of, I would call it ex-ante evaluation, how the project will impact the environmental, social, what we call receptors, and how we can mitigate that. So for every project, as a result of our environmental social evaluation, we have certain actions, recommendations, action plans, what the client has to do in order to fulfill our requirements. The third important pillar of this integration, it's a capacity building. It's our work with the client directly, helping them to improve their performance, to build their capacity to manage environmental social risks, and actually improve the performance of the project. So this is how we kind of approach in this theory of change aspects of the development. And what's important when we work with our clients, capacity building mostly related to the project, how to do the project, what to do as part of the implementation. But what we also trying to emphasize, going beyond the project and to build the management systems, how the client will undertake similar projects in the future, just to make sure that our impact and our contribution, our additionality doesn't stop only with the project we finance, but also how the client will perform positively on the ESG front in the future. That's a very important aspect for us. And then the final pillar on this equation, integration ESG, it's a little bit unusual because as a bank, we're also facing certain expectations from the capital markets. We issue quite a lot of what we call labeled bonds, green bonds, social bonds, SDG bonds. That's how we raise money from the capital markets to finance our activities. But when you issue bonds like that, you also have sort of expectations from your investors. When the people buy green bonds from the new development bank, they do also ask us a lot of questions. And they put requirements not only about utilization of this money, but also in terms of the reporting, in terms of impact estimation, and in terms of the channel information from the use of proceeds of these bonds. And in a sense, this kind of also keep us on our toes because we not only have to apply with our internal policies, but we also have to make sure that we report to the investors up to the expectations. Probably some of you already heard about some sort of the green taxonomies, social taxonomies, how to use the money properly in order to fulfill the certain market expectations. And this is something that's relatively new. Relatively, it's like 10, 15 years. But again, it's becoming a part of this equation. So it's also help us not only integrate environmental social consideration, but also, in a sense, create internal infrastructure for data collection, for data management, to report to our investors, and in a sense, to keep ourselves accountable. How do we integrate environmental social aspects in our overall complexity of applications?
Thank you very much, Mr. Roman, for your very clear insights which introduce us to different pillars in the context of a new development bank to integrate ESG aspects. We know that it is a general tradition or general trend to apply similar mechanisms in the multilateral development agencies. So by taking the opportunities of having Mr. Andrews sitting here with us, so Mr. Andrews, would you also share with us some thoughts? And do you see any similarity of how GCF, as the largest climate fund in the world, apply the similar practices as NDB, or it is something different? We look forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues. Now you can hear me. Thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity. I'm not sure if I can be representing all MDBs in the world. I'll try my best. But at least from the Green Climate Fund's perspective, let me speak to you about this very important topic, smart moves for a greener future. I think there's no day that goes by in the GCF, and as well in my unit, in the Independent Evaluation Unit, that we're not thinking about this. This question of how can we build systems that are smarter, considering climate change and climate change considerations for the future. Again, the GCF looks at climate change from both the adaptation perspective as well as the mitigation perspective. So for those that may be wondering, adaptation really looking at resilience building, and the mitigation really looking at mitigating any type of CO2 emissions, and building smarter systems to look at that as well. I've written it down just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of that. The GCF portfolio currently holds 314 projects. We're in own finance about $18 billion in financing, and with co-financing about $66 billion in financing private climate change projects across more than 132 countries. And it's quite impressive. And it's just really researched these numbers this morning. It's quite impressive to see these numbers as well here. With one goal, and the goal really is to look at paradigm shift. Paradigm shift in low emission and climate resilient development pathways. And I think this is important to put out from the governing instrument of the institution to really look at what are we here for and what are we trying to achieve. We're really looking at development activities. And we want to think about development activities in a climate context. And we also recognizing that we can't do this alone. All the money in the world is not going to solve the climate projects and needs that we currently have. So we need paradigm shift. And we either bring that paradigm shift ourselves or we bring partners such as the private sector to help us replicate and scale to the extent needed to meet at least some of these climate needs. How do we do it? We do it through accredited entities, so we have a wide array of organizations that work with us, UN agencies as well as MDBs, as well as private sector organizations such as HSBC and the Macquarie Bank, just to name two, all the way down to national direct access entities, which could be anything from a ministry of environment to NGOs. So let me give you that example of CSE in Senegal, which is an NGO that looks at monitoring environmental impacts. So why am I mentioning this? This is probably relaying back a little bit to this question about the MDBs. We are a fund that really looks at funding different kinds of projects at different sizes as well as for different audiences. And the people that help us, our partners, are a real loose collection of different levels and different sizes of organizations. So from my unit, and now speaking a little bit about the lessons that we've drawn from this, my unit has distilled a lot of lessons from over 27 corporate evaluations and about 20 ongoing impact evaluations that were undertaken for projects. And I thought about this quite hard to bring you something sensible today. So I have 4 comments that I want to bring to you, 4 aspects that I think are quite striking across our findings. And the first fundamental challenge that we're always witnessing is the challenge of complexity in monitoring. The reason why I mentioned complexity is that after 10 years of climate project implementation at the fund, we have recognized that climate projects should certainly not be complicated, but are very complex. And they're complex because they're rarely touching at only one set of actors, at one set of sector, or only looking at one country, one specific national or local context. They're actually taking on a lot more. They're trying to really look at transboundary issues, larger issues that go across a certain set of actors, and certainly a certain set of countries. There can be regional projects, there can also be global projects that look at global supply chains and the needs for that. So this is something that we have to reckon with, and it's quite difficult. To be very honest, when we see project teams, they're quite baffled by that challenge of complexity. In addition to this, we also find ourselves in a very new field. So we've done a global evidence review just to look at what works, what doesn't, and for whom globally. And we've done this in 2019. The first one, we've completed about 10 or 11. I'm not quite sure, but I'm happy to give you the exact number afterwards. And we looked at the global collective evidence on climate change adaptation. And what we found there is the word climate change adaptation did not appear before 2011 in the global research arena. So it was very much unknown from a perspective of impact evaluation, systematic reviews that would give you some sort of direction of what works and what might not work and what might not be the right thing to invest in. So we're really seeing this complexity coupled up with this question of a relatively new field where we're not quite sure how things will be turning out. We also found that knowledge on impacts exists in particular areas, but not everywhere. So we found, for instance, that there were lots of study in agriculture and a lot of studies on impacts and around the interventions in conservation, in irrigation systems, in extension services in agriculture. But there's very little knowledge when it comes to other sectors, such as built environments or built infrastructure. There's just not enough knowledge on this. We also found when we look at the outcomes, that the outcomes are mostly about adoption of new practices, adoption of a new method of, a particular seed that you would use in an agricultural context, or perhaps also an adoption that would bring a certain economic benefit. Other areas are relatively unknown. So this is adding to this question of climate projects. And now to the monitoring. So in order to address this complexity and this lack of knowledge, the GCF has adopted a different approach. We don't go by sectors, we go by result areas. So we're trying to cast the net quite widely to say, okay, we want you to think from the get-go about the results that you would like to achieve, rather than only thinking about your activities in the preferred sector that you want to look at. And from that perspective, we looked at a couple of evaluations. We've done an infrastructure energy evaluation. We've done also an evaluation on water and food security. And here what we found is while this system is quite interesting to look at results, it's difficult to implement in reality. So it's remaining rather aspirational. So again, what you could take from this is that we're still struggling to find a way forward on how to look for results in this context. Okay, so the second aspect I want to share with you today is the involvement of stakeholders in results management and the importance of co-benefits. And here, and I'm really cherishing the words from Roman just before looking at the environmental and social safeguards, we also found that for our evaluation work, we cannot do this in isolation. We need to look at a multi-stakeholder participation in the project design, as well as in the project implementation of climate action. What does that mean is that we really would like to include people on the ground into our monitoring activities, to not only look at what are we finding in the infrastructure that's being built and the positive effects, but also look at what is out there in terms of the environmental and social performance of projects, the co-benefits that could come with, employment, perhaps an increase in speed to get to hospitals when you think about a construction of a street, to only name an example here. So we're really thinking that we're still struggling across the organizations to truly find an approach for co-benefits, to understand how are we not only looking at the results that we are after from a perspective of construction, but also from a perspective of social and economic performance. And I think that is what Roman mentioned, but please correct me if I was wrong. The third part that I want to bring was also mentioned by Roman before. This is the inclusion of local communities and indigenous peoples in particular. We've looked at the GCF portfolio and the work that it does through its MDBs and looked at the question of how inclusive are we. And while we have a very strong policy that sets a very strong tone on engagement of local communities, in particular indigenous communities and their traditional knowledge, because we need to recognize if we want to drive sustainability, those people need to come into conversation. We recognize that in the implementation of climate projects, in particular in areas in adaptation, climate change adaptation, it's not easy. And often overshadowed by lots of engagement, and there is a trade-off between engagement as well as the implementation of the actual project. Here again, we are asking ourselves the question, and that's where we are at the moment here at the GCF. We're asking ourselves the question, so what is it? Are we going for climate urgency and implementing of the project, or should we be thinking about sustainability and inclusion? I think it's not an easy question to answer because it's not either or, it's probably both, but it requires a quite fine and balanced approach to consider this. Okay, lastly, I know I'm almost running out of time. I've been told by my team to not speak too much, so sorry for that. The last one is the consideration of the private sector. As I said initially, we can't do this alone. We would lie if all as you are here, China, India, and everyone else, collectively, we still don't have enough money to look at the climate needs. We need a private sector in this. And as the climate needs outweigh clearly the public funds, we need to start understanding what the private sector is and at what level the private sector works. So we've done a private sector evaluation, again across the portfolio, and it's been quite nice to see, I see the sign, to see a couple of things that I want to share, just 3 steps that I think are necessary for us to really truly bring in the private sector. First, be the catalyst. At the GCF, we often have this discussion about, okay, we're just leveraging funds through the private sector, but that's not good enough. We are of the opinion you really need to think about a catalytic role in climate finance, and I'm happy to talk about this more. Second one, be country-driven with a plan. You can't enter into this conversation without the country partners, and you need a plan for this. And lastly, it also requires a cultural shift. And perhaps there's colleagues from the NDB world in the room, and I'm happy to be schooled on this. But I believe that the MDBs as well as the GCF, we haven't really found a way to truly speak the culture of the private sector. The private sector requires predictability, speed. These are concepts that are usually not very common and usually not named in the same sentence with the multilateral development bank world. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much for the question. Back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Andrews. And you mentioned a very important point that we cannot do this alone, and the importance of involvement of stakeholders in the results framework, including the inclusion of local community. And in that regard, I'd like to move the question to Madame Mindy Jibber, the DG from DNEO, because we understand DNEO really play a very important role in evaluating the government of India's community development programs and other area-based schemes, including those in the renewable energy sector. So, Madam Lily, in this regard, do you have any source or any insights on what are the cross-cutting, some of the cross-cutting issues or findings emerged from the research and evaluation work done by your institution? Thank you.
Thank you to the Independent Evaluation Office in Delhi for organizing this panel. It's happy to be here. I'll just begin by giving you an overview of DNEO. DNEO stands for the Data Monitoring and Evaluation Office. We are an independent office under Niti Aayog, India's premier think tank. And in that sense, we are an independent evaluator of Government of India. We evaluate all the schemes run by the central government. And monitoring and evaluation has had a long history in India. And all the schemes which are conceived for every department, as it were, all the schemes have monitoring and evaluation embedded in their design. So the monitoring part at the time of conception of the scheme, a log frame for monitoring is prepared, presented before the competent authority which approves the scheme. And then year on year, every year when the annual budget is presented before the parliament, this outcome monitoring framework is also presented so that the parliament knows how the public money is going to be spent and what are the parameters on which it will be, the performance of the scheme will be evaluated. And DNEO plays a part in this. And then throughout the year, these monitoring targets are evaluated. They're broken down quarterly, 6 monthly, and we evaluate them and we review them. Evaluation is it's more of a deep dive which happens in India after an interval of 5 years. Mostly the schemes are sanctioned for 5 years, and for a scheme to continue beyond this period, third-party evaluation is mandated, without which the extensions don't take place. So for evaluations, we pretty much follow the internationally accepted framework, the RISI framework of OECD, to which we have also in India added 2 more dimensions. The coherence, we look at the coherence of the scheme, how the different components of the scheme are working together towards a common goal, and the equity parameter on how the scheme impacts the vulnerable populations across the country. And of course, all of you are aware of the RISI framework, the relevance, the effectiveness, efficiency, sustainability, and impact of schemes is measured. Whereas DNEO is on the government side, the evaluator of schemes, we do have in India a growing ecosystem of private evaluation consultants who are coming up in a big way. We just had a session where it was told that evaluation is not considered as a profession. But I don't think I agree with that, because we have a very vibrant ecosystem in India, and they are very, very active in evaluation of schemes. And India, as you know, is a federation of states, and there are some state governments which also undertake evaluation of their state level schemes. And we at DNEO are trying to create monitoring and evaluation cells at the state levels also, so that they also, embed this culture of monitoring and evaluation in their schemes. Coming to the topic, climate change, as has been rightly mentioned, affects all of us and has actually exposed the vulnerabilities which come with it for households, for populations, for institutions. And so there has been a conscious shift in the policy landscape towards creating government schemes which are climate resilient. And this takes two forms actually. We have in India introduced new schemes with conscious emphasis on promoting green and clean technologies, like incentivizing production, consumption of electronic vehicles, shift from fossil-based fuels to renewables and so on. But there has also been a shift in modifying the existing schemes, the long-running schemes, by bringing in components of climate resilience in them. To give you an example, we have a very old scheme of midday meals where free meals are provided to students of primary schools in government-run schools. And the aim was to basically improve attendance in schools and to fill the nutritional gaps. But over the years, it has new components have been added. Now there is a lot of emphasis on creating vegetable gardens in the school itself, so that organic produce or local produce is used in the meals. Rainwater harvesting structures are constructed to support this activity. Piped water supply is made available to promote hygiene and sanitation. Scientific waste disposal methods are being used. So I'm just trying to say that even in long-running schemes, an element of climate resilience is being built in. So when this is happening, it follows that the evaluation also has to focus specifically on how the climate resilience parameter of a scheme is working. So we at DMU are very much aware of it. So we do it in a couple of ways. One, there is now a renewed focus on the environmental sustainability of the scheme. We already do evaluate the scheme on the parameter of sustainability, but we do it specifically now more focused on how the scheme is impacting the environment, whether it is mitigating the effects of climate change or not. Second, climate resilience, as we just mentioned, and it is a multi-sectoral kind of a phenomena. It cannot be tackled by one sector or one scheme alone. And we recognize that, so our evaluations are basically systems-based across the sectors, across themes, to analyze whether a scheme, whether climate resilience is being, the scheme is promoting climate resilience or is undermining it. So that makes the climate resilience a measure not only of success of a single program, but how different programs are basically, adding to the capacity of the people to withstand shocks of climate change without giving up developmental gains. And the third parameter I mentioned, equity. We look at how a scheme is impacting the vulnerable sections of the society, the tribal groups, women, and those living in vulnerable geographies who, as you know, are the people who are the first to bear the brunt of climate change. So that is how we are going about it. But having said that, we do recognize it's a very complicated process, not very easy to evaluate. And we are looking at things like adopting new technologies, maybe artificial intelligence, machine learning, to analyze data, so that we look for hidden patterns of vulnerabilities, which may result as a consequence of the implementation of schemes. And there is also a growing body of interdisciplinary studies, because it brings together statistical methods, social studies, as well as a study of societies. Basically, it's not just quantitative statistical methods alone which would help. And I would say that AEW is a good opportunity to look at what is happening in this field in other countries, and we look forward to hearing from others and learning from their experiences so that we can strengthen our own systems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You mentioned about climate change is a complicated issue, and to address this complicated issue, we need as evaluators pay due attention to the complexity of establishing the monitoring framework as mentioned by other panelists. In this case, we learned the important role played by the MEO in ensuring the evaluation of the government schemes implemented in the country will be proceeded properly and to reach the expected income. And today we also have another speaker from China, which represent a slightly different entity, which is the project implementation agency. I believe that we will get more insights and also first-hand experience and insights from Mr. Gao Changli from the Guangdong Energy Group to introduce us how or what the perspective from the company side, how the evaluation plays in ensuring the smooth implementation and knowledge sharing of our project in the country. 我们知道呢，能源转型已经成为当前全球应对气候变化、实现能源供给安全、推动高质量发展的关键途径。在2018年，中国海上风电产业处于早期阶段的时候，金砖国家新开发银行董事会前瞻性地批准了广东阳江沙爬海上风电项目，为新兴市场规模化发展提供关键实践案例。那么今天呢，我们有幸邀请到广东省能源集团的代表李高强先生，为我们分享一下从项目后评价的这个视角来看，如果我们设计一个海上风电项目的话，需要从哪些方面可能会从项目设计、项目施工建设以及并网环节遇到哪些主要的挑战？我们知道广东海上风电阳江沙爬海上风电项目已经在2020年底实现全容量并网。但是当时遇见了非常多的挑战。Now we'll introduce Mr. Gao Changli to share with us this experience from the project.
尊敬的各位领导、各位来宾非常感谢作为广东能源集团的代表，给大家分享一下这个阳江沙爬项目的一个建设经验，就是在项目过程中我们遇到的一些问题。首先请允许我介绍一下我自己我是李高强，来自广东能源旗下广东阳江海上风电公司的一位员工。我是全程参与了整个项目的一个建设。下一步呢，我就简单的说一下项目的一个情况。广东粤电阳江海上风电项目呢，它是在2015年的时候开始立项启动，2017年核准。新开发银行呢是在2018年时候启动这个项目的贷款，当时贷款了20亿人民币，作为我们项目的一个就是主权贷款。2019年我们项目开始了就是可研初步设计，包括我们下一步的施工招标。2020年和21年就是项目建设。2021年刚开始那个张老师就说了，2021年我们项目是全容量并网的，后面我还会重点的去说这个事情。就在项目建设过程中呢，就是全程从勘察设计、施工，包括我们运维并网其实整个项目建设过程中，我们是遇到了很多问题和挑战但是在各个领导的支持，还有就是新开行的帮忙下，我们是逐一克服。就是在2021年的时候实现了全容量并网。下面呢，我首先就是从介绍一下我们整个项目建设过程中遇到的一些问题和挑战。首先，第一个挑战就是我们当时就是整个海上风电的制度标准制度，它是属于一个不断完善的一个过程。众所周知这欧洲的海上风电它发展还是比较快的，比较早的。但是在国内呢，真正海上风电就是起步是从2010年开始，2015年我们项目建设的时候，其实国内也就是建成了几个那个示范性的一个项目，而我们项目可参考的样本呢很少。欧洲呢，它因为不受台风影响，对我们的项目的参考意义是不是很大的？就是在这样的基础上，我们项目起步但是呢，就是国家呢，就是陆陆续续在我们项目建设过程中，就出台和完善了很多标准制度规范。比如说我们项目建设过程中，就是比较关键的2个标准，一个是勘察标准，一个是设计标准。就是在2019年，由我们项目执行单位就是广东亚， 他来完成那个就发布的，就主导编制发布的。还有就是我们海上的就是相关的行政审批的，比如说我们的海洋环评，今天大家很多专家都在谈海洋就是环境影响的，就是这些评价我们当时国内其实没有体系的，也是在过程中陆陆续续发布的。还有我们的海缆路由，它也是其实就是今天的跟这个主题绿色发展还是挺契合的，因为它是还要穿越一些就是生态弧线。就这些政策是逐陆续的在发布，也支撑了我们项目就是同步的，就是我们去建设、开发、建设完成。这是第一个挑战。第二个挑战就是我们当时的那个电价，就是对我们项目的它的成本的带来的一个影响。就是2019年的时候，就国家就其实发布了一个电价政策，就是明确呢，就是在2021年之前，项目要全容量并网。如果没有全容量并网的话，就是我们每一度电跟那个电价补贴的电价差的4毛钱，就是如果21年完成的话，大概是8毛5的电价一度电；如果没有的话，到2021年之后，大概就是4毛5分3，这是广东那边的那个标杆电价，就每一度电差4毛钱。这样的话就算下来，按我们项目的规模容量。它是一个30万的工厂，然后就是每一年它大概收益要减少3个亿左右，就是项目全生命周期我整个收益要减少接近80个亿，由此带来就是我如果说我没有拿到电价补贴，我每一年项目经营可能就要亏损1个亿，因为刚开始我也介绍了，项目我们是采用的新开行的一个主权贷款。如果是主权这个，如果项目亏损的话，可能会造成巨大的一些就是社会影响，所以说我们就是必须要在2021年之前完成。而同期呢，因为电价政策补贴这个政策发布以后，其他项目所有的项目国内都希望在2021年之前完成，这样呢就导致我们整个项目建设成本大幅上涨，尤其是我们的传播资源、原材料。所以说我们必须要在2021年之前完成。当然了，这个也是刚才说了，我们是通过大家的支持和帮助，我项目是在2021年之前就全容量并网了。第三个我们遇到的一个挑战就是我们项目的一个实际特点。我们项目呢，它是属于近海区域的一个项目，它的特点呢就是岩面起伏大，就是埋层浅，然后。这样的一个专业的来解释呢，就是说我们要完成这个勘察设计施工，就需要那个涉及到一个很专业的词叫嵌岩。嵌岩我做个简单的一个比喻，就是相当于我在石头上要打个孔。如果说其他项目的话，一个基位基础施工可能1天就能完成，它是直打进去的。而我们嵌岩的话，一个基位要120到150天。就是不是翻倍的一个概念，甚至有些特殊的可能得要300多天。因为这个特点的话，导致是国内的很多施工单位，它其实对这个没有这个经验也没有就是不太愿意参加这个项目，所以说导致我们就是项目建设过程中也是给我们带来了巨大的一个困惑。当然了，我们项目也虽然遇到了这么多项目困难。但是在执行过程中尤其是新开行这边也在整个过程中给了我们很多的支持，派遣了很多的专家团队帮我们进行那个把关最终我们项目还是在2021年之前，2021年的12月5号项目全容量并网我的分享就到这谢谢老师。
谢谢，感谢李部长给我们带来的非常精彩的第一手资料，关于项目经验的一个总结。Thank you very much, Mr. Li, for your very insightful inputs and your feedback. You give us a very good different angle of thinking because if we emphasize respect to the ownership of our member states of the country, how we are going to establish a very comprehensive evaluation framework if there is no such standards even established within the country. That might be a question posed to all the evaluators sitting in this room with us, and also we need to continue to explore the solutions together with our partners. So now is the first round of questioning and the very different but very useful insights from our panelists. I will move to the second round of questioning. We discussed about the key findings of what happened or the projects we implemented and also evaluated in the past. The second round of questioning will focus on the future. So moving forward, what are the opportunities may emerge for us as either multilateral development agencies or government institutions or the private sector from the each developing countries, how we can work together to promote this joint knowledge sharing and also make sure the insights generated from the evaluation of the past projects can be further informed in the future. So I will start with Mr. Roman. If you can share with us your thoughts on how we facilitate this knowledge sharing based on the experience of NDB finance projects in our member states. Over to you, Mr. Roman.
Thank you. And maybe very quickly on this. I think I'm coming back to the topic of our conversation, which is innovating climate resilient infrastructure. I think climate resilience is becoming more and more important concept for us. In a sense, it's something new because in the past, traditionally, it wasn't one of the aspects that we were looking at. I think it's only about maybe around 2010, 2011. I think there were some reports coming from the insurance industry, from the IFC, that climate will have significant impact on any physical infrastructure, any physical real assets. The conversation started on that. And I think right now we are in a situation of how to operationalize, how actually to understand the complexity of this resilience, how to achieve the resilient infrastructure. And I think we're still doing our homework, how to do that. For me, it's two different questions in climate resilience. First, you have to understand whether your specific infrastructure project is climate resilient, means whether it's going to be affected by the climate change, if it is affected, how to make it less vulnerable and more resilient to sustain the climate change effects. Second question, even more important, how to make sure that infrastructure that we build now is going to help the communities to be more climate resilient in the future. So it's more like selection of the project. I think on the first question, there is a growing industry of the consulting expertise, and we at NDB, we started to pilot a physical risk from climate to our infrastructure project. We started this process about 3 years ago, and so far we conducted several different pilots. It's really amazing that even within this very short period of time, I can see that methodology used by the consultants really evolving very fast. The finding, the solution we suggest in our recent project, which we completed a couple of weeks ago, it's much more advanced compared to the methodology different consultants used years ago. So I think we're getting to this answer, how to make sure that our projects are more climate resilient, because again, as I mentioned before, we come with our expertise and with our capacity that we apply. So clients actually appreciate the specific recommendations, what needs to be done with climate or with their specific assets. But the second question about how to make sure that the infrastructure we build is going to help the communities be more resilient in the future is still, to me, very much open-ended. And I think, of course, for different industries, different infrastructure, whether it's power, transportation, utilities, water, sanitation, or educational services, social services, the answer is different. And I think it doesn't make much sense to generalize. But one of the aspects I would like to share with the audience, which really interesting, I think is very exciting for me and my colleagues working on NDB, is the use of the nature-based solutions, use of assistance services to kind of climate-proof the communities, to climate-proof the future welfare of our communities. We at NDB had a couple of examples, a really small pool, again, hard to generalize, but we did have a project where the rationale of the project was actually helping the communities to rebuild the ecosystem that will help them to adapt for the future climate change. The rationale under this was because the infrastructure based on natural solutions will be more resilient, will improve not only their exposure to the hazard, but also improve their vulnerability. Again, this is a very new area. I think I'm aware that here in China there is a number of different examples from different provinces. I think China is making very great advances and we're trying to learn from them. But I think this is an area for all of us in the future, kind of, to join together and to learn from different countries and different industries how to establish this consistent practice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roman, for your insights, especially the suggestions on how we can think further, including the different ways, including the use of natural-based solutions in our projects financed by NDB, but also let's continue to explore this question with the GCF and hear from Mr. Andrews. And what is the situation in GCF, and especially how GCF work together with different stakeholders in developing the national evaluation capacity in terms of evaluating climate resilient infrastructure projects? Mr. Andrews, you have the floor.
Thank you again. An interesting question, I thought, when I saw it first. It's obviously not easy to answer, but I'll give it a try. From our perspective, and I would not be an evaluator if I don't start with some challenges that we foresee before I come to the future. But from our perspective, there's something, when you think about capacity building, and when you think about capacitating those partners that you work with, including the beneficiaries and the groups of beneficiaries in the country, one fundamental question that we always ask ourselves is, what is country ownership? So what is the ownership in the country? And it's not an easy concept, and we know that this concept has been there since the early international declarations in the early 2000s, where we really looked at country ownership as an important discursive element in development cooperation. Now, from the GCS perspective, we're still struggling with this. We're just this week finishing an evaluation on country ownership in the GCF. And what we're finding is that it's not hard to explain and to put factors on it. We tried it anyways, but it is very hard, because very often you say, okay, if we're engaging with the government, we will have country ownership, but then that is country ownership by, you would almost call it government ownership. It might not be the full ownership that you're after when you look at the entirety of the country. So here we went with this and said it's almost unimplementable to get good country ownership. We see a lot of factors, and at the macro level, we see that country ownership includes the development status of the country, the climate positioning of the government in the country, the macroeconomic stabilities, broader geopolitical aspects. It's far more broad-based, macro-level based than it is project-specific. Right? So that's the first macro level that we think macro-level factors influence this. Secondly, we think about structural factors. These would be akin to the rules of use, to the formal or informal rules that you have to set up that action arena where the different actors are meeting. So that is then a little bit more project-based. And lastly, it's also cultural factors. And I know this is difficult to communicate, but just to say, we looked at frameworks where the cultural factors are described as the attributes of the communities to shape the norms, the trust, the social capital, and the ability for collective action. Sorry, I needed to read this. So in essence, for us, country ownership really comes at these three levels, and one needs to adjust this before really truly thinking about capacity. How we have done it and how we would like to do it in the future from an IEU perspective is that we look at this, we see that the GCF already has a readiness program, so it's supporting countries to get ready to access the GCF, which means that they're really funding funds to look at the institutional capacity, the internal capacity in the country. Unfortunately, most often it's very technical. It looks like technical assistance, but that's sometimes needed, but not always. It's actually more about building this institutional framework in the country. We, as an independent unit, we think about this from the perspective of how can we bring evidence that truly matters. And again, I'm coming with what I said before. It's a very early field. We not always have the answers as international organization as multilateral organization. So what we're saying is, let's go together, collectively, jointly, into an exercise to look at what is globally out there. What do we know globally? Can we replicate this? Can we learn from this? So far more, not an evaluation exercise, as you said before, Roman, not only about the accountability, but actually about the learning and the dialogue together to really think, what is it that we can learn from others? What is it that we can use? So that's our way forward. We really want to have a stronger foot on global evidence. We want to know what works, what doesn't, and focus in different contexts, and then model this to the capacity needs and to the work that the fund can do in a particular context. And lastly, this is only a plea that I always have. I strongly believe in impact evaluations. I truly believe we need to look beyond monitoring of outputs and outcomes. We need to go back in because these are often not sufficient to tell us the true story that happened in the various contexts. We've heard from our colleagues from China on all the challenges that were witnessed. And at the end of the day, it needs a proper impact evaluation to really truly look at what is the attribution of us in this context. What have we really truly brought to the table? And that needs a lot of different things. We have a lot of learnings on this, but it needs consistent definitions. We need to know what we're talking about and have joint agreement on the definitions. We need reliable and comprehensive data, and I think that's where capacity is the most needed. We can only be as good as the information that we have available to us. That's all I have to say. I know time is of the essence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we understand, of course, as you mentioned that in building up the capacity at the national level, the importance of consistency of evaluation of concept and the definition, and also the availability of reliable data, which as multilateral development agency we will heavily rely on the government support. And in this case, I will invite Madam Mindy Chimber from the MAU to share with us about yourselves from the government institution perspective, how multilateral development banks can work better with government institutions in further strengthening the national evaluation capacity at the country level. As we know that in April 2025, the Independent Evaluation Office of New Development Bank signed an MOU between the MAO and NDB to jointly promote such initiative, and we really will look forward to get your insights on where the direction are and what are the strategies out of priority. Thank you. Over to you.
I mentioned earlier also what the area which I foresee greater engagement with the NDB and maybe other NDBs is capacity building. The fact that you work in different countries and you have the kind of feedback on what works in which country, that experience can be of use to us on how we can adapt it to suit our systems. And as I mentioned, we would also look forward to greater collaboration on how to develop better techniques of evaluation. It is an evolving field. Climate resilience is just one part, and that in itself is a complicated thing to do. It takes time, it takes capacity. So it has to be on different parameters one needs to collaborate. We would like inputs on how to build the capacity of our evaluators, build a very vibrant evaluation ecosystem, maybe a lot of exchange of ideas and how you evaluate and how we evaluate and what we can learn from each other. And as I said, use of future technologies can be another area where we can collaborate, put our efforts together to come to an agreement on what works and what doesn't. So that is how I look for a very collaborative partnership, as it were, with NDB and other countries as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam DG, for your very valuable feedback and including, for instance, the examples you are giving, potential collaborations in terms of technology, the techniques, and continue and strengthening the partnership across different stakeholders. And in this regard, I will continue our conversation with our last speaker, but not least. I will invite Mr. Lee to share with us, because you just at the first round of question, you mentioned so many challenges and issues emerged from the offshore wind power project financed by NDB in China. So from your perspective, and I know that you're very knowledgeable not only for this project but also other renewable energy sector projects. So from your perspective, what are the experiences that we can share, not only in China, but maybe in other NDB member states in the renewable energy and clean energy sector? So,作为新开发银行在中国海上风电项目早期阶段支持的一个重点和首批项目，广东阳江沙爬海上风电项目旨在优化广东省的能源结构，促进清洁、低碳、安全、高效的现代能源体系建设。那么基于项目现在，因为我们知道刚才李部您提到，2021年底我们实现全容量并网之后，其实已经运营了一段时间。那么基于这个项目现在的这个实际运行情况，您能不能跟我们分享一下这个项目迄今为止在清洁能源和减排方面取得成就，以及有哪些可以提供给新开发银行其他成员国进行分享的一些经验？李部长 ，over to you。
喂，好的感谢主持人首先再次感谢各位领导、各位专家、各位来宾我在这里面呢，首先就是把我们这边项目从2021年闭网以后，我们取得的一些成效，也给大家做一下分享。首先，我们项目是2021年12月5号闭网以后，截止到2025年7月份，我们项目全就是上网电量。目前是24.6亿度电，这个概念是什么呢？它这个发电量可以满足我们有120万家庭，这个全年的一个用电，还可以就是一个大中型城市大半年的那个全社会用电需求，这是我们一个直接的那个经济效益。第二个呢，在发这些电呢，我们是纯粹的绿电。它是就是在节能减排方面的贡献也很大，就是有一个数据，就是我们在24.6亿转化出来，我们现在减排就是二氧化碳的减排是197万吨，这个数据的意思就是相当于我们现在已经种了1.1到1.21棵树，它产生的那个碳的一个减排。同时呢，它在这个基础上，我们也减少了二氧化氮氮氧化物包括烟尘等污染物的排放，这也是给我们沿海这个生态环境做出了实实在在的一个贡献，就是减少了就是我们这些污染物的一个排放，然后那些就是叫什么，就是比如说雾霾这种天气的一个减少的一个发生，这是第一个。第二个就是我们这个项目，它其实不仅仅是一个就是效益的一个本身，它其实也算是一个火种，就是带着我们新能源就我们能源集团的一个社会它的结构的一个转型。我们项目是广东能源集团第一个核准的海上风电项目，在此之后，我们项目就是整个集团陆续开展海上风电。截止到今年，我们现在已经建成的海上风电装机容量是220万千瓦，在省属企业里面我们是排第一，还有一个90万的千瓦现在目前已经核准了，预计今年年底到明年年初就要开工建设。同步呢，就是根据广东省能源的海上风电的发展规划，我们也积极的布局深远海。就是朝后续的海上的深远海综合能源方向去发展，这是我们成功的把我们就是能源集团这边的就是能源结构转型完成了，这是第二个。第三个就是这个项目它是在广东阳江，它其实在阳江我们项目进驻的时候，阳江它是没有海上风电这个产业的。就是因为我们项目加上项目就是同批建设的其他项目， 甚至我们阳江公司的还有一个青州项目在那边建设以后，实实在在的就推动了阳江本地的它的一个产业链的一个发展，海上风电产业链，就是现在形成了一个整个产业园里面，它的投资规模已经超过了100亿。这个就是我们整个项目，通过还有就是给当地就是制造了有上千个这个就业岗位，就真正的实现了就是我们经济效益和社会效益的就是双重发展，协同发展。针对于就是这个是我们项目的就是一个就是关于就是取得的一些成效，关于对其他新开发银行这边的一些这个经验就分享，我这地方可能还是有几点，觉得因为我是作为一个项目的一个全程参与者，觉得这几个点我觉得非常有感触。首先第一个就是还是我们的这些标准体系，之前我也说过，这个如果说没有标准，就是没有。就是我们国家这边的一些政策没有一个持续的话，我们是这个很难去发展这个海上风电的。所以说，如果说其他的新开发银行的国家要发展海上风电，一定要有跟国家的战略对接，要有持续的一个政策的一个扶持。第二个就是我感觉上就是我们还是要有一个专业的一个团队。海上风电看的就是我们是设计的多专业的一个跨度，它的人才是一个复合型人才，就是我们要做好整个项目的人才团队的一个建设，比如说我们项目当时就是集团那边加强领导派驻社会招聘，同时呢，你比如说在整个执行过程中，我们也邀请了像新开行、我们水利总院一些专家给我们项目把关。做好技术的这个管理团队建设，第三个就是我们要做好项目的一个管理，整个项目它是其实工期建设包括也专业设计也很多，然后在整个过程中我们要从项目的就是安全质量进度就要做好精细化管理，第四个方面就是我们这个项目就如果要发展海上风电，我觉得还是要。在起步阶段，可能还是要作为一个样板工程，就首先第一个先建立一个样板，从样板然后开始吸取经验，然后逐步的往下推展、扩展。第五个要分享的就是我们的那个技术的一个更新迭代，就是比如说我们项目当时建设的时候，风机专机是6.45兆瓦，5.5、6.45，但是国内现在目前已经发展到就是已经到20兆瓦。甚至25兆瓦那个样机已经开始装了，这也是我们技术的一个持续的更新迭代。现在还包括我们后续发展海上风电，可能是朝着那个漂浮式柔性直流送出，还甚至于是海上风电加其他资源的综合利用开发，比如说那个波浪能，高空风电，还有一些就是潮汐能。一些综合能源岛，还有海上风电、制氢这种综合能源岛的一个发展方向。第五个就是我还是要强调的，就是第六个了，这个是就是我们的一个就是产业链的本土化。刚如前面我分享的一样的，一个本土化的一个产业链可以大大降低我们成本，同步也可以促进当地经济社会的发展，就是我们经济效益和社会效益的一个双重的一个共赢的一个角度，然后可促进这方面的一个发展，最后一点还是要，这个地方就是我觉得很重要一点，这是一个切实的体会，就是跟多边银行的这个合作，因为我们项目，就是跟2018年跟新开行合作以后。在整个执行过程中，新开行是派出了大量的专业团队，为我们从勘察室、从设计、施工，包括我们后续项目的评价，给我们的大量的支持，也让我们从另一个视角，就是去这个项目建设它的意义在哪，让我们从另一个视角去审视这个项目。之前我也说，我是一个纯粹的项目工程者。对于这些评价呢，我确实没有太多经验， 就是因为有新开行这些专家，包括尤其是张老师这边几次跟我们沟通，我们才有这些体会。就是后续如果新开行想发展海上供电，可能更多的要跟新开行这边的经验像这些多边机构跟他们多合作多请教也许更有利于我们项目后续的海上供电整个产业链、整个集群的一个发展。我的分享大概是这么多。
谢谢您，李部长，非常有用。Thank you very much, Mr. Lee. Actually, if I use one sentence to summarize your inputs, and I hope my peer colleagues sitting in this panel agree with me, is you actually emphasize the usefulness of evaluation in summarizing and synthesizing the project, the lessons generated from this project. Because you mentioned that among all the key points you mentioned, the lessons generated from this project, including how important it is to establish the monitoring relation framework to cover or to use the domestic guidelines as a benchmark, which maybe not or have not been introduced by other MDB member states. But as Madam DG mentioned that, so this is where we can learn from each other. Maybe this is how and also why MDB can play a better role as a bridge across countries across projects in our member states. To summarize or before I close our session today, I believe that after receiving so much very useful insights from our panelists, we may have colleagues from our room to raise their questions and have a closer interaction with the panelists sitting in our podium. So I will open the next round of session of Q&A and session. So any colleagues sitting in this room have your question, please raise your hands. And I believe we have staff sitting in this room. We'll give the microphone to you. Yeah, we have one gentleman sitting here. Yeah.
Kia ora, I come from the Cook Islands in the Pacific, so I'm particularly interested in some feedback from GCF, because I think GCF is probably quite heavily involved in the Pacific. So you identified some of your initial findings, and I wanted to know if there were findings that were specific to the Pacific or to smaller island developing states, because we're very small in terms of population size. And I believe, administering larger projects is quite costly, and so we may not necessarily be attractive in terms of attracting, high value, high investment projects in the region. So, I'd be interested to hear your feedback. You mentioned the readiness program, and how is that tracking? And what are some of the lessons learned from these smaller island states? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And this is a very specific question to GCF, I believe. But maybe we take a few questions and then we will give the floor back to our panelists.
So, Niazi, Audit General from the Maldives. From the Supreme Audit Institution's perspective, we have the interside, and there's a working group on the environment audit, and a lot of the Supreme Audit Institutions actually do a lot of performance audit, especially on the environment perspective and climate adaptations perspective. So I was wondering if the country institutions were used by the development partners, it would create a more opportunity for public debate, because the Supreme Audit Institution's reports actually gets tabled in the Parliament, and the public also comes to know the work of even the projects, even the infrastructure projects. So I was wondering, my reflections is if development partners would make better use of the country systems, especially the work of the national audit institutions.
Thank you. And I see two more hands. The lady, yeah.
Thank you. Yanji Kim from the Green Common Fund, Independent Evaluation Unit. I had a question for Niti and also the gentleman from the NDB. So you mentioned earlier that it's, especially climate adaptation is quite complex. And so the definition for resilience in the context of climate change is also, I think it could vary. And Niti, you said that it's the ability to withstand climate shocks and hazards without losing key development gains. And I think regardless of where we are from, we would agree with that general kind of definition. But one of the evaluation findings from GCF-IEU is that still, when we discuss climate adaptation and interventions, we tend to focus a lot on human-centric metrics and human development indicators, like people's income levels, dietary diversity, food security, water consumption, and so on. And I'm just wondering, how are you also looking at maybe the nature, ecological systems, and biodiversity-related resilience gains? And also, since we discussed the nature-based solutions from NDB, maybe you also have some, more sophisticated, advanced indicators for measuring a success. So I wanted to ask about. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take the last question from the gentleman over there.
Thank you. I come from a university in Sri Lanka. And thank you very much for the panelists. You made an excellent attempt to narrow down the very wide theme to fit into your institutional perspective. But when you look at the theme, which is evaluating climatic resilience of infrastructure, we can look at it in two sides. One is climate resilience and climate change resilience. These two are widely different. Because when you look at climate change, we look at few climatic parameters like rainfall, sea level rise, temperature. But when you look at the climate holistically, we need to look at the environment of climate. So these evaluations should be different. Then looking at the infrastructure, I think we mainly focus on physical infrastructure. And when it comes to physical infrastructure, when we build physical infrastructure, whether we can include the components of resilience into it. When we have existing infrastructure, physical infrastructure, how can we modify it so that we can add a certain element of resilience into it? And I would focus more on institutional infrastructure. Taking the example from agriculture, especially taking irrigation-related institutions. How can we make this institutional infrastructure resilient against the climate variables and also climate change scenarios? I think I'm just trying to open up or put the theme into more wider perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll just let's start by taking these questions from this four guests from the floor. From our room. So as I understand that all of these questions actually very much focus on the initiatives taken by our, for instance, partners GCF and also NDB. So I will give the floor to Andrews and then maybe Mr. Roman. You can take the questions, all of these questions together, but share with whatever you what you feel comfortable with, and maybe Mr. Roman can complement from the NDB perspective.
Thanks, colleagues. That's great to be first because then I can leave the hard question to Roman. Colleagues, thanks for the question. It's always great to have that room. I love engagement far more than I love presentations. From the Cook Islands, I'm great to see you, great to have you here. It's really great to hear from you. Look, from the GCS perspective, we're serving definitely also the small island developing states. You remember this probably better than I do. It's enshrined even in our governing instrument to work on on the vulnerable groups of countries, in particular the SIDS, but also the LDCs in Africa. We've done over the years, we've learned a lot about what is missing from the GCS perspective for the SIDS. And one thing that I want to put out here perhaps is, the importance of adaptation work. And not the large-scale adaptation work, but the small-scale adaptation work. That's something that we're struggling with as a fund, but also the partners that we have around. So it's often a question of, are we flexible enough? Are we understanding enough the concerns that are locally there? And do we have the right partners to work with us? And that goes hand in hand with another observation that we've had, which is high transaction costs. Unfortunately, the systems that we've got in place today are meant to be for the larger countries, for the larger problems, if you like. We're often forgetting that in contexts such as in the SIDS, we have high transaction costs. Because going from one island to the next island is not an easy task, right? So this is what we're realizing, that there is a lot that's needed from a policy perspective to work on how can we reach those most vulnerables. Because on paper, it might look like it's easy, but the realities are often very different. So what I give you is, we found high transaction costs is definitely an issue, and that needs to be tackled separately. We also found GCF is not flexible enough with some of the things that it does. And lastly, when you come, I spoke about readiness and the capacity building. In the SIDS is very different to other countries. We're often looking at entities that are very, very small. Look at Micronesia. We have, in the Micronesia Fund, we have 2 people to do projects for the GCF. Imagine 2 people trying to get over all the requirements that are there. So this is the sort of thing that we're discussing. We need more bumps on the seat. Sorry for my French and my bluntness here. But we need more bumps on the seat, and that's what readiness should be addressing there. And this is the question of how can you bring capacity to the right contexts. That's what I would say for the esteemed colleague from the Cook Islands. Thank you very much for the view from the auditor perspective. Absolutely, I think what we're missing a little bit is to look at what are we learning at an MDB level, and how do we bring this down to the national level, so that those people can also learn. Because lessons learned are great if they're communicated, but actually it's even better if we're really learning from those. So I totally agree with you. We should be having different ways of how to communicate this down to the country level. I'm interested to hear more if the order perspective could be a way forward. So that's quite insightful. Thanks for the comment. I'll take that back to Seoul, South Korea. Roman, in the interest of time, I'll give it to you.
Sure. Maybe just to continue on this conversation on the country systems. Yes, absolutely. It's very important. And in fact, at NDB, we are using country system for our own benefits, using data from agencies like yours and from the other regulators to a certain extent, to lighten the burden on our own diligence. And in doing that, we following what transpires right now as the direction of the movement from the many multilateral banks, moving from the bank frameworks into more inclusive to the country systems. And I think getting data points from the countries is very important for us. We do conduct our own reviews of the country system, so we try to benchmark the country system with our own standards. But then when we know where the gaps are, we try to use as much as possible the data from the country systems, instruments developed for the country systems, to comply with local regulations in order to document the compliance with our frameworks. And in this regard, it's not only the regulators, but also the auditors are very handy. So I think it's actually this is one of the areas I think not only HDB but other multilateral banks are approaching. So it's much more rigor right now. I heard a very interesting question about the human-centric perspective, human-centric approach to everything we talk about here. Everything about adaptation, about resilience, and guilty as charged. We all here talking about humankind. We're talking about how it will affect us, how we develop the strategies for humankind to be more resilient, adapt better to climate change. And even when we're talking about nature-based solution, the idea in our mind, how we make nature help us to survive, help us to adapt better. And I think that's where we are right now. Just as a caveat to this, it's not NDB's view and it's not actually something that we do, but there is a very lively discussion right now, you probably know about academic circles about the nature rights. What are the rights by the nature? How the humans should use the approach of the rights of the nature for making decisions. But to be honest with you, I really haven't seen any specific application of this framework yet. Whether the organic nature or non-organic nature has the same rights as the humans, it's still more kind of scientific and metaphysical debate. I think we all kind of still operating within the human-centric perspective. But I think using the nature-based solution is one step in the right direction. Kind of, we are creating the nature, we're helping nature to sustain, to adapt, and by co-benefits, we as a humankind also benefit from it. But probably this is as far as we go at this moment.
I would like to add to that. I don't agree what you said. This may have been the approach in the past. Ever since climate change has become a very tangible thing, human-centric and environmental-centric doesn't work. As I said, it's a composite approach. If you're only working towards improving livelihoods without taking into account the impact of your schemes on the environment, you are not making them sustainable. They will, run out of time. So, it's a no-brainer. If you need your schemes to continue well into the future, provide the benefits to the people, it has to be environmental. That is what I meant, because now we are all aware of the kind of vulnerabilities to human population and to our immediate environment, which have come to the fore as a result of these extreme weather phenomena. So I don't think there is a difference. And on a point which was made again, the difference in the definition of climate resilience and climate change resilience, again I feel they are two sides of the same coin. In a scheme, like for example, we run the Jal Jeevan mission, basically to provide potable piped water supply. But we keep in mind when we design the scheme that there is climate change, there is a climate vulnerability, the groundwater sources are depleting. So when you design the scheme, you keep that in mind. And then when you implement the scheme, you keep in mind the climate resilience of the scheme. You design systems on how to manage groundwater, how to manage disposal of water, how to recycle it. So I think both these things can be built in the same scheme. So there is no difference as I see it. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the feedback from the floor, and I believe the insights from the panelists will share insights that will bring our maybe new angles that we can discuss and explore further. For the interest of time, before we close our session, I would invite all our panelists sitting here to share their one last sentence, takeaway message. Maybe this time I will take the other way around, starting with Mr. Lee. What are your key takeaway message from our panel today? Or what are the key messages you want to share with our distinguished colleagues sitting in this room? Over to you, Mr. Lee. 李部长，现在我们先由您来开始。
好的，非常感谢各位专家、各位领导。在这个过程中，我也听了各位专家的那个发言还有回答，就让我感触颇深。这也让我们包括跟新开行这边的合作，让我们从另一个角度去审视这个项目它建设的意义在哪里。然后包括这个今天的主题就是我们绿色发展这些衔接，这也是我们集团的一贯宗旨。就是我们集团呢，通过跟新开行合作，后续呢也愿意跟我们多边机构继续深度合作，再造我们这个绿色这边。我的最后发言就是。
Thank you very much. And if I may invite you, Madam DG.
that we can cover this important parameter. I'm sorry. I hope you got that. Since it was the last voice, I can't repeat it.
And on top of that, you effectively stole what I would have said. So thank you much. From my perspective, I thought about this quite a bit, but here, I don't think we should worry about complexity. I think we should engage with it. The systems thinking approach, as you said it, is here. Where it's no longer a separation between what's human and what's nature. We can, it's tangible. Thanks.
Just continue on the complexity, because that's what transpired for me as a part of the conversation of this panel. Complexity is there. And I think definitely both evaluators will benefit from inside of the implementers. Similarly, implementers will definitely benefit from inside of the evaluators. So kind of integration of the two is very important. I think the evaluation should be kind of joint exercise, but also extremely important, it's not only joint, but also inclusive of affected parties. Whether it's a communities affected by the projects, whether it's regulators, whether it's government agencies, or whether it's anything, any other entities, you know, since we talked about the nature, perhaps it's also kind of put in the bucket. So it's kind of one science-based, inclusive conversation.
Thank you very much for all the very insightful takeaway message from the panelists. Today we have the pleasure to hear the insights from the practitioners, from the ESG perspective, but also from the project implementation partners who really work at the front line to implement our climate resilient project, but also we get the view and perspective from the government representative as well as our peer colleagues from GCF. I would like to join all the insights shared by our panelists. As New Development Bank, and I believe some colleagues who also speak Chinese, we know that in China we call the New Development Bank Golden Bridge Bank, which means we serve as a golden bridge across our member states. And that is why we have our distinguished panelists from different angles and perspectives sitting here. And it also showing, I believe, a joint commitment from us, from different angles, from different stakeholders, that we work together and share a joint future. And that is my takeaway from this panel session. And for any questions, if you want to continue the discussion with our panelists, feel free to reach them. And on the screen, you will see a scan QR code, which is, we would like to invite all our distinguished participants for this panel to please scan it and provide your feedback for our session. And we look forward to continue our discussion with you in other sessions in the following days in AEW. Thank you very much, and we would like to thank you, and also thanking, maybe let's give a very warm applause to our distinguished panelists sitting on the floor. Thank you very much. Our session is over, and we'll continue our sessions event at the end of this day.